I was doing the usual weekend cleanup, sorting through the mess in the garage, when I stumbled upon it. Diane had always been a bit of a pack rat. We'd accumulated all kinds of odds and ends over the years, but something about this suitcase caught my eye. It was wedged behind a stack of paint cans and old holiday decorations, collecting dust as if it had been purposely hidden away. Out of idle curiosity, I pulled it out and dusted it off. It was heavy, and something rattled inside. I hesitated, almost feeling like I was crossing a line. But Diane and I had been together for nearly a decade. She was always so transparent. Why should I feel guilty for taking a peek? So I opened it. The content surprised me, to say the least. Inside, I found a series of souvenirs, postcards, keychains, small trinkets. They were from cities I'd never heard her mention, places like Austin, Denver, and Orlando. Diane worked in pharmaceuticals, constantly traveling for conferences and networking events, but she'd never talked about these places. In fact, when she'd come back, she often complained about the long hours, the dull presentations, and the hotel food. I tried to shrug it off, but a nagging doubt clawed at the back of my mind. Why had she kept these things hidden away? I brushed it off as paranoia, but the thought lingered. I didn't confront her right away, no, I didn't want to look foolish if there was a simple explanation. But the idea gnawed at me, whispering that something wasn't right. That night, after Diane had gone to bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. We'd always had a trusting relationship, or so I believed. Maybe it was nothing, but the thought of her hiding even the smallest thing from me felt like a betrayal. I tossed and turned, replaying the last few months in my mind, looking for any hint that something was amiss. Diane had been distracted lately, that much was true. She'd been spending more time on her phone, laughing at messages I couldn't see, then quickly locking her screen if I looked over. Finally, unable to shake the feeling, I slipped out of bed and headed to her home office. Diane was a creature of habit, and over the years, I'd learned her passwords. I told myself I was just checking her travel records, looking for an explanation. But the moment I opened her email, a flood of messages from someone named Jeremy filled the screen. At first, they seemed innocent, exchanges about work and industry updates. I relaxed, relieved it wasn't what I'd feared. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. The messages grew more personal, and the way they spoke to each other, it was intimate in a way that made my stomach turn. They had inside jokes, references to places I'd never been, things I'd never seen. And the way she talked to him, it was as if I didn't exist. I could barely breathe. I closed the emails, numb with shock. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air growing thick. I stumbled back to our room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at Diane as she slept peacefully beside me. She looked so calm, so oblivious to the storm she'd unleashed inside me. My hands clenched the sheets as a wave of anger surged through me, but I forced myself to calm down. This couldn't be real, I told myself. There had to be some other explanation. I decided I wouldn't confront her, not yet. I needed to know the whole story, to find out exactly what I was dealing with. If I barged in, demanding answers, she'd only deny it or twist it into something else. No, I would wait and watch, and when I was ready, I'd be the one in control. Over the next week, I took my time piecing together the details. I checked our bank statements, her social media, even old text messages she'd forgotten to delete. What I found tore me apart, piece by piece. Diane had been using her work trips to spend weekends with this guy, Jeremy. While I'd been at home, working late to support our family, she'd been off creating an entirely different life with another man. One night, when she was in the shower, I finally checked her phone. She had it on Do Not Disturb mode, but I unlocked it easily enough and found a message thread with Jeremy. The things she wrote to him, they were the same things she used to say to me. The familiar pet names, the little phrases only we shared, she'd given all of it to him, as if our life together was just an afterthought. I read their messages in silence, feeling a hollow ache settle in my chest. Every message, every photo, was a reminder of what I thought I had, a loving marriage, a loyal partner. Now, all I could see were the lies, the sneaking around, the moment she'd slipped away to be with him. Memories of our years together replayed in my mind, now tinged with bitterness and anger. I could see it all now, the way she'd smile at me, reassure me, and then walk out the door to be with him. For a few days, I let myself feel the heartbreak. I kept everything inside, not letting her see even a flicker of my suspicion. But as the anger brewed, a dark determination settled in. I'd given everything to this marriage, my time, my effort, my love, and she had thrown it all away. Diane thought she could fool me, play me for the fool, and walk away unscathed. But she was wrong. She wouldn't get away with it. The moment I made that decision, it felt like I was regaining my strength. The ache in my chest was replaced by a calm resolve. I didn't want to confront her in a fit of rage, like some betrayed lover. No, I was going to make her feel every ounce of the betrayal she'd shown me, to watch her realize what she had lost. Over the following weeks, I meticulously put my plan in place. I was careful, calm, and methodical. Diane had no idea what was coming. As I quietly prepared, she continued with her charade, slipping away for her business trips without a second thought. But this time, I didn't feel the pain. I was already looking forward to the day I'd watch her world crumble, the way she had shattered mine. The day I decided to take action was the day I stopped feeling like a victim. Diane may have blindsided me, but I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I'd built my life around her, trusted her completely, and she'd laughed in the face of that trust. Now, it was my turn to change the rules of the game. I spent that week calling lawyers. I wasn't just looking for someone who could handle a divorce, I wanted a lawyer who'd handle it with precision, a professional who knew every loophole and tactic that would work in my favor. It didn't take long before I found one. His name was Greg Turner, an attorney with a reputation for being ruthless when it came to clients in cases of infidelity. When I explained my situation, he didn't waste time with sympathy or small talk. He just nodded and took notes. "Do you have proof of her affair?" he asked, leaning forward. I pulled out a stack of screenshots, emails, and messages between Diane and Jeremy. I had carefully documented everything, sorting it by date and even highlighting some of the more damning exchanges. Greg looked through the evidence with a professional calm, but I could see a glint of approval in his eyes. "This is more than enough," he said. "With this, we can push for a favorable settlement, possibly even full control of the assets if we play it right. She's put herself in a vulnerable position, and we'll use that." It was exactly what I wanted to hear. We discussed the process in detail, how we'd proceed with dividing assets and the strategy to use in court. Every step was carefully laid out. Greg emphasized that secrecy was key. The less Diane suspected, the easier it would be to push the proceedings in my favor. He assured me that, with the evidence I had, I was in a strong position. Diane wouldn't see this coming. Over the next few days, I set up a new bank account under my name alone. Quietly, I started transferring funds from our joint account, making sure not to move too much at once. The last thing I wanted was to raise her suspicions. I told myself this was just the beginning, a safeguard to ensure she didn't drain everything the moment she realized her web of lies was unraveling. I also started compiling an inventory of all the assets in the house, making notes of everything that mattered to her. Diane had always been materialistic. I'd indulged her tastes, thinking it was part of building a life together, but now those same things would be part of my revenge. Every piece of furniture, every item of jewelry, every trinket she'd insisted we buy, soon, it would all be hers to miss. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. At home, I acted as if nothing had changed. I asked about her day, gave her a kiss when she came home, and even planned a couple of date nights. The irony wasn't lost on me, and at times, it felt almost absurd. Here I was, holding every intention of dismantling her life while she carried on, blissfully unaware of the storm coming her way. One night, Diane casually mentioned she had another business trip coming up. I nodded, feigning interest. "Where to this time?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Orlando," she replied, her eyes lighting up the way they always did when she talked about her so-called trips. She told me about the conference, dropping some industry jargon about pharmaceutical presentations and networking opportunities. Sounds like a good opportunity, I said, forcing a smile. Inside, I was already planning the next steps. The night before her trip, I made us dinner, a rare effort since she often took charge of cooking. She looked surprised, even a little touched, as I set the table. I made sure to open her favorite bottle of wine, playing the part of the doting husband, soaking in her appreciation with a growing sense of dark satisfaction. If she was going to walk all over our marriage, I wanted her to feel the sting of everything she'd betrayed. After dinner, she mentioned that she was tired and wanted to go to bed early. I watched her leave, feeling a chill settle over me. She was preparing for a weekend with him, and here I was, setting up the last of my plans while she slept soundly under my roof. For a moment, anger flared up again, that raw fury I'd been suppressing for days. But I took a deep breath, letting it pass. The time for confrontation would come, but only when I was ready to turn her world upside down. That night, after she fell asleep, I made my final moves. I transferred the remaining money from our joint account and deleted any evidence of the transfers. I knew she'd be busy with him for the next few days, too distracted to notice anything unusual. I packed a few essentials and stayed with a friend for the weekend, sending Diane a quick text saying I'd be away on a last-minute work trip. If she was going to lie to me, I'd lie right back. For the next few days, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. There was something liberating about reclaiming control, about knowing I was no longer the fool. While she was off with Jeremy, I met with Greg to finalize our strategy. The divorce papers were ready, the financials secured, and every last detail was in place. But I didn't want to simply file and let her off easy. That would be too simple, too clean. No, I wanted her to feel the sting of betrayal, to see everything she'd lost. So, when Diane returned from her trip, I was waiting for her in the kitchen, a stack of papers and documents spread across the table. She looked startled, surprised to see me home so early. "James," she started, "I thought you had a work trip?" I smiled, a cold, calculated expression I hadn't practiced but felt natural in the moment. "Change of plans. I thought I'd surprise you instead." She glanced at the papers on the table, her eyes narrowing. "What's all this?" I gestured to the documents, the evidence, the transfer statements. "This, Diane, is the truth. Every lie, every secret, all laid out." Her face paled as she looked down, realizing exactly what I had discovered. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. For the first time, Diane was speechless. I watched her, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment she finally understood the consequences of her actions. I leaned back, savoring the silence, watching her struggle to find some excuse, some way to wiggle out of the inevitable. But there was nothing she could say, nothing that would change what was coming. The final act had only just begun. Diane's mouth opened and closed, her eyes flicking over the papers like she was trying to find an escape, some loophole that could make all of this disappear. But this wasn't one of her business trips she could spin with a few quick lies. No, I had laid everything out in black and white, giving her no space to maneuver. She finally met my gaze, and I could see a flicker of fear in her eyes. "James, please. Let's talk about this. I can explain." I held up a hand, stopping her. "Explain what, Diane? That you've been lying to me for years? That the whole time I was here, taking care of everything, you were out there building a life with someone else? Go ahead. I'd love to hear your explanation." She looked down, her face flushed. I didn't mean for it to get so far," she stammered. "Jeremy and we were just friends at first. It was innocent, and then it got complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, feeling my anger bubble up again. "So complicated that you lied to me for years? So complicated that you used our money to take these business trips? So complicated that you dragged me through your mess without even a second thought?" She reached out, her hand trembling, but I pulled back before she could touch me. "James, please," she pleaded. I don't know. I was lost. I felt like I needed more than just this, but I didn't mean to hurt you. The audacity of her words struck me like a slap to the face. More than just this? Than me? You needed more? I said, my voice a low growl. So while I was here, working myself to the bone, you were out there just finding more. And now you expect me to forgive you? I don't expect you to forgive me, she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. I want you to understand. Understand? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. Diane, the only thing I understand is that you decided our marriage wasn't enough for you. You chose someone else. And now you're going to have to live with that choice. She looked around, as if the walls of our home were closing in on her. We've been together for so long, James. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Oh, it meant everything to me, I shot back, my voice cold. I built my life around you, around us. I trusted you completely. But clearly, that trust didn't mean a thing to you. It was all just convenient. She looked crushed, but I couldn't afford to let my guard down. Not now. I had prepared for this confrontation, imagined it so many times, yet none of those fantasies had prepared me for the cold reality. Still, I held my ground. I took a deep breath and spoke again, my voice calm but firm. I've already filed for divorce, Diane. Greg Turner, he's the best in the business. We've got everything set up so that you get as little as possible. Financially, you'll walk away with almost nothing. Consider it a consequence of your complicated decisions. She gasped, her eyes widening. You've already? Yes, I said simply. And I've transferred all the money from our joint accounts. I made sure that you won't be able to drain a single dollar from me. You'll have what you brought into this marriage, and nothing more. The panic in her eyes was unmistakable now. She looked at me, then at the papers again, as if hoping they'd suddenly vanish, taking all her misdeeds with them. James, you can't do this. You don't understand. I didn't want to hurt you, I didn't want to hurt me. I interrupted, feeling the anger break through my calm facade. You didn't want to hurt me, Diane. Every lie you told, every night you left me here alone while you were with him, you hurt me. And now you're going to face the consequences. Tears streamed down her face, and for a moment, I almost felt a pang of sympathy. But then I remembered every night I'd spent wondering where she was, every instant she'd looked me in the eye and lied, and the sympathy vanished. James! I love you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Don't, I said, my tone colder than I'd ever heard it. Don't say that. Don't insult me by pretending you love me. If you did, we wouldn't be standing here right now. You made your choice, Diane. Now you have to live with it. She covered her mouth, stifling a sob. Please, just give me one more chance. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy, I'll quit my job. I'll cut all contact with Jeremy. I shook my head. It's too late for that. The time for saving this marriage was years ago, back when you first started betraying me. Now, I just want you out of my life. Her hands shook as she gathered the papers, her face pale and desperate. But where will I go? She asked, almost in a whisper. Not my problem, I replied without hesitation. You had a life with him, didn't you? Maybe he'll be willing to pick up the pieces for you. Because I'm done. I watched as her shoulders slumped, the realization sinking in. Diane wasn't just losing me, she was losing everything she'd built with me, everything she'd taken for granted. I could see the weight of her choices pressing down on her, and for the first time, I felt the smallest sliver of satisfaction. She had taken so much from me, but now I was finally taking something back. She stood there, looking lost, broken. For a moment, I felt a hint of the old sympathy, the part of me that once cared deeply for this woman. But then, just as quickly, I reminded myself of the truth, of every lie, of every betrayal. This was the woman who had turned my life upside down, and now she was finally getting her due. "James," she began, her voice cracking. "Please, let's not end it like this. Think about everything we've been through." I looked her in the eye, unflinching. "I have thought about it, Diane. I've thought about it every day since I found out about you and Jeremy. And the more I thought, the clearer it became that you don't deserve another chance." She nodded slowly, her face streaked with tears. She seemed to realize that there was nothing left to say, no argument she could make to reverse the damage. She picked up her purse, her movement sluggish, defeated. As she walked to the door, she turned back one last time, her expression pleading. "I know I messed up, James. I know I hurt you. But please, don't hate me." I felt a pang, but I shook it off. "I don't hate you, Diane. You're not worth the energy." Without another word, she opened the door and stepped out, leaving our life, our memories, everything we'd built behind. The door closed softly, and I was left standing alone in the empty house, feeling an odd sense of finality. For the first time in years, I was free of her lies, her manipulations, her betrayals. But I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could finally reclaim my life without the weight of her deceit hanging over me. After Diane walked out, I thought that would be the end of it. She was gone, out of my life, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The anger that had burned inside me for so long finally flickered out, leaving behind a strange emptiness. I had spent so much time plotting my revenge, every action calculated, every word rehearsed. But as the days passed, I felt less triumphant and more hollow. At first, I pushed the feeling aside, blaming it on exhaustion. Divorce is draining, after all. I kept myself busy, throwing myself into work, seeing friends I hadn't spoken to in ages, even starting a workout routine. Anything to keep myself moving, to keep from thinking too much. But no matter what I did, the emptiness remained, like a dull ache that refused to go away. One evening, about a month after she'd left, I found myself sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at a single-place setting. It was one of those small details I hadn't thought about. For years, I'd only ever set 2 plates, one for her, one for me. Now, with just one, the silence in the house felt heavy, almost unbearable. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I'd adjust. After all, this was what I'd wanted. But as the weeks passed, I found myself haunted by the little things. The empty side of the bed, the quiet evenings, the way my thoughts wandered back to her no matter how hard I tried to stay distracted. I knew it was irrational. Diane had lied to me, betrayed me, destroyed our life together. And yet, I couldn't seem to let go of the memories of us, of the years we'd spent building a life that, despite everything, had once been good. One night, I was going through some old boxes in the garage, clearing out the last of her things. As I dug through a box, my hand brushed against something familiar. I pulled it out to find an old, faded photograph of us from our first vacation together. We were on the beach, both of us laughing, arms around each other. I remember that day vividly. We'd been so happy, so certain of each other. Looking at that photo, a wave of grief washed over me, so sudden and overwhelming that it took my breath away. I sat down right there on the garage floor, staring at the picture, unable to stop the tears. It hit me all at once, the realization of everything I'd lost, not just because of her lies, but because of my own pride. I had been so focused on revenge, on punishing her, that I hadn't allowed myself to grieve the good parts of what we'd had. In that moment, I felt the weight of all of it, the memories, the love, the years we'd shared. And beneath it all was a sense of loss so profound, it felt like it might break me. I spent the next few days trying to come to terms with it, but the emptiness only grew. The anger that had once fueled me was gone, replaced by a sorrow I couldn't shake. I realized, too late, that in my quest to hurt her, I had also hurt myself. By tearing apart everything we'd built, I had left myself with nothing but memories I couldn't bear to keep and a future that felt bleak and directionless. One evening, just as I was sinking into the darkest depths of my grief, I heard a knock at the door. It was Diane. She looked different, tired, drawn, as if the weight of everything we'd gone through had left its mark on her, too. For a moment, neither of us spoke, and I could see the sadness in her eyes mirrored in my own. "James," she whispered, her voice fragile. I'm so sorry. I know it's too late, but I needed to tell you that." I nodded, unable to find the words. Part of me wanted to close the door, to shut her out and protect myself from more pain. But another part of me, a deeper, quieter part, wanted to listen, to finally let the truth between us lay bare. She took a shaky breath and continued, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know that I regret everything. Losing you, it was the worst thing that ever happened to me." I swallowed, feeling the ache in my chest deepen. "Diane, I spent so much time hating you for what you did. I thought getting rid of you would make it easier. But all it did was make me realize how much I lost, too." She looked down, her hands trembling. "I was wrong, James. I see that now. I was selfish, and I took us for granted. I destroyed the best thing in my life, and I can't take it back." The words hung between us, raw and painful. In that moment, I could see that she was as broken as I was. And despite everything, despite the lies and betrayal, a part of me still loved her. Maybe it was the memories of who we had been, or maybe it was the lingering hope that somewhere, beneath all the hurt, there was still something worth saving. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "I don't deserve it, but if there's even a chance, if you can ever find it in your heart to forgive me, I want to try again. I want to be the person you deserved all along." I felt my throat tighten as I looked at her, seeing not just the woman who had betrayed me, but the woman I had once loved more than anything. The woman who had, in her own flawed way, been my partner, my other half. Slowly, I took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against mine. And as I did, I felt a small flicker of hope, a faint glimmer of something I thought I'd lost forever. Maybe it was foolish, maybe it was dangerous, but in that moment, it felt real. But life has a way of being cruel, even when you think you've found redemption. 3 months later, Diane was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive illness. The doctors gave her 6 months, maybe a year at best. We fought it together, side by side, trying to make up for the time we'd lost. But the illness was relentless, robbing her of strength, of vitality, of everything that made her the woman I'd known. In the end, I was the one who held her hand as she slipped away, the last whispers of our love fading into the silence. She was gone, leaving me with the memories of a love that had been broken but, in those final moments, had found a fragile sort of peace. Now, I sit here in the empty house, surrounded by echoes of a life that no longer exists. The revenge, the anger, even the forgiveness, none of it matters anymore. All I have left is the memory of us, of a love that was flawed, fractured, but deeply, painfully real. And as I look around, I know that I will carry that memory with me, a bittersweet reminder of the life we shared, and the love we lost too soon.